Well met by moonlight, dear ones. I'm Curiosity, and this is my Jamboree, a firelit gathering for explorers of the uncanny, the frightening, and the hard to explain. Tonight we spin tales of oversharing co-workers, underdressed swordsmen, and accidental guests. So settle in by the crackling fire, lean in close, cover your hot cocoa so the flies don't get in, and let's begin. Our first story is from r/creepy encounters, posted by runswithbulls12. Please be warned, this story mentions an incident of self-harm, though I've redacted the details. I got promoted to a newly created position at my job a few months ago. There were 2 such positions created, and they finally filled the second one with an external hire about 3 weeks afterward. We'll call him Brian. Brian was an odd duck, shall we say. We're talking about the mental health field, though, so odd ducks among staff and the folks we serve aren't unusual, or red flags. At first he just seemed quirky, then quirky shifted to weird, and then weird finally shifted into oh hell no territory. There's a ton of details I'm omitting for purposes of time and space, but some of the things that caught my attention included Brian's habit of kicking his shoes off and lounging, almost like he was napping, during our virtual clinic team meetings, his preoccupation with fixing his roommate's personal drama instead of doing his own work, asking me invasive questions about whether I smoked weed, and when he could hang out with my boyfriend and me, and coming into work at the tail end of food poisoning, eating a bunch of candy, puking in an open trash basket, and then just leaving it to sit. Some of these I might have chalked up to immaturity, but we shared, at one point, that we were the same age. In spite of my discomfort, I did my best to be friendly, helpful, and make him feel welcome, since he seemed to be fixated on whether or not staff liked him or not, and constantly on the receiving end of difficult feedback. One Friday, about 3 weeks into his employment, Brian came to work in a negative headspace, for a number of reasons, the chief one seeming to be an altercation involving his neighbours and his dog, that apparently had almost escalated to violence. Some people just buck up to buck. I don't front. When I asked him what he meant, he just kind of smiled and said, "We don't know each other well enough for that yet." I was a little disturbed by that, but didn't press further and tried to refocus on my tasks for the day. The day hit an escalation point when he had an altercation with one of the therapists, who told him that he was communicating rudely, which he was, and his energy was so dark and tense that I had to leave our shared office and finish my work elsewhere. I learned later that several other staff had troubling interactions with him before he left for the afternoon. I knew he was going out of town for the weekend, so at around 5 p.m. while I was on the treadmill at the gym, I texted him to say, "Hey, drive safe. Hope this weekend is restorative for you." A few minutes later, he texted me a picture showing clear evidence of self-harm, and a message, "I hurt myself, so I don't hurt nobody else." 5 p.m. on a Friday is not when you want to have to call your supervisor, but needless to say, I immediately hopped off the treadmill and did so. I also texted him back to say that he probably should seek more healthy coping mechanisms, as someone who worked in the field we shared, and asked if he was going to be safe that night, to which he replied, "I'm good." To wrap things up, I was pretty uneasy the whole weekend, not knowing what to anticipate on Monday morning. To be honest, my worst fear was they would keep him on as an employee, because I no longer felt the least bit comfortable sharing an office with Brian. Luckily, 15 minutes after he arrived at work, I watched him leave with a box of his belongings and drive away. It meant twice the caseload for me, but by that point I was too relieved to care. I had to do some damage control, including talking to angry families that had been assigned to him, and reassuring another co-worker who had complained about him that Brian probably wasn't going to seek out revenge, even though I myself texted my neighbours to be on the lookout if they saw his vehicle, as he'd driven me home once when I needed a ride. But the most telling evidence of how creepy this felt came when I was in a meeting with a client, a week later in my office, someone who was young but extremely intuitive. As she was standing up to leave, she glanced over at Brian's empty desk and casually asked, "What happened to Homeboy?" I responded by saying he was no longer employed with us. She paused, sighed, and said, "It's been a good week." When I asked her what she meant, she looked me dead in the eyes and simply said, I did not like that guy, and left it at that. So Brian, I hope you're working on your issues, but let's not meet again. Runs with Bulls left a postscript I think it's important that I share with you all. This is in no way, shape or form intended to shame anyone who struggled with self-injury. I myself have had a pretty lengthy and intense history with it, and now work with countless people who also do. What made it creepy instead of just a heartbreaking mental health issue was the text that he delivered with the picture. In addition to the fact that he was communicating it to someone he'd only known in a work context for 3 weeks. The fact that he engaged in it would not have bothered me as much otherwise, but that felt like a big nope moment. And I think we're all feeling that same level of nope right now. I think we both hope that wherever Brian is now, he's getting the help he needed, for everyone's sake. Our next story is from r/Let's Not Meet, posted by Tar Minastir. This all happened about 5 years ago when I first moved to the capital city of my country, also its biggest city. I'm male and I was living in a flat with 2 of my friends, both female, Tina and Lara. They shared a room while I had my own small room. My bed was directly under the only window in the room. The apartment was on the ground floor, so if you walked past the building, you were on eye level with the windows. This, however, was never a problem, as there were no paths leading past the building on that side. It was just around 20 meters of grass and some trees, and then the road. At this point it's also worth saying that I am a sword enthusiast, and own several swords. This will be relevant for later. All my swords are battle-ready quality for those who want to know, as I like using them in cutting practice, and therefore wall hangers are not an option. Now to the point of my story. My roommates and I were hanging out in their room one afternoon. As we were talking, Lara mentioned she thought she heard some knocking on the window the night before, and also thought she saw someone on the other side of the window. Tina and I did not really take that too seriously, as Lara often had wild dreams, and could be a bit of a scaredy cat sometimes. Now, it's worth noting that all of us enjoyed playing pranks on one another, so in the evening of the same day as we were returning from the shops, Tina and I decided to knock on Lara's window, as a prank. Of course we scared her a lot, so we apologized. She laughed, said we got her good, and we all went to bed. At around 3 o'clock in the morning I woke up and heard knocking. I was convinced that Lara was trying to exact her revenge, so I just looked through the window, and to my surprise, I saw a strange man on the other side. At first I completely froze and just stared at him. He looked like he was in his 40s or 50s, and had blonde or grey hair. I didn't see him well in the dark. The staring contest must have lasted about 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then all of a sudden he broke eye contact and reached down and pulled up his pants. I didn't realize it before, but he had his pants pulled down. At that moment I also thought I saw a knife in his hand. That unfroze me, and my first thought was that I had to defend myself. In retrospect I find this silly, as there was still a window between us and he presumably only had a knife. Now I am quite large, nearly 2 meters tall and 100 kilos, so I had every confidence I can take this guy. But since I thought I saw a knife, I grabbed one of my swords, a 1.5-hand bastard sword, and went to open the window. All that took me a couple of seconds. The creepy man was gone, but I was in a bit of an adrenaline rush, so I opened the window and jumped out. I started looking left and right, trying to see where he went. After about a minute there was no sign of him and my adrenaline wore off. I stood there still as a stone for a couple of seconds with my sword still in hand. All of a sudden I hear a scream. It came from the road that was approximately 20 meters from the building. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what had happened, but I finally realized that a woman, probably in her 20s, saw me standing there from the road. If the sword in my hand wasn't scary enough, I must also add that I sleep naked, and didn't have time to put on any clothes before jumping out. I tried to scream, "Sorry," and "I can explain," but the woman ran away. I crawled back in and put on some clothes. I went to wake up my roommates, but they were already awake. Apparently they also heard knocking on their window, but decided to ignore it since they thought it was me. They completely woke up when they heard the scream and looked through the window to check. They just saw me trying to climb through the window. We stayed awake since we were all too shocked to sleep. We were just talking about calling the police when we saw the police drive up the road. They got out of the car and started walking up and down the grass in front of my window. As they approached the window, I opened it. They said they got a report about a naked man climbing through this window. Luckily, no mention of the sword. I told them it was me and the entire story. They only half believed me, and I'm pretty sure it would not end well for me if my roommates didn't back me up. We later filed our own report. We never saw this man again, nor heard anything back from the police. To conclude, creepy man, let's not meet again. And to the woman I accidentally scared, I am super sorry. And let's also not meet again like this. Well, OP, they say there's no second chance at a first impression. I hope whoever you accidentally scared that night got over it quickly. But perhaps I shall one day read a story on this channel of the woman startled by the naked midnight mystery man with the sword. Oh well. Our last story was posted by Under the Bridge. Me, my sister, and my mum have been trying to make sense of this for the past couple of hours, and the facts get less comforting the more we compare our experiences of that night. So last Friday night I, 17 male, was home alone while my family, besides my 21-year-old sister, stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog, Bosco, was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. And if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts, and alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday the sound of his barks at nearly 12 a.m. were disconcerting to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in, or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let Bosco bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just someone walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and he would quiet down once they passed. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I sleep in the basement, and walked upstairs to check it out. As I suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I'd let Bosco out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I have never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and the like, so I would never, home alone, forget to close the door. I am 100% certain. But at the time I didn't let myself think about these facts, or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open, because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even a panic attack, if I didn't explain this away. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, the lights were all off, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease, and upon finding nothing, went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it, when it started to sound like human footsteps, accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walks around for about 10 minutes, before I put in my earphones and talk myself down until I can fall asleep. At 2 a.m. that same night, my sister comes home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, which he never does. There's even a gate to stop him getting to the basement, whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door, busy with work, for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and Mum were home with me for a movie night, while my dad and brothers stay at the cabin. I remember the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that the same night, an hour or so after they got home, the door was open again, the same door that was locked from the inside, and had not opened since earlier that night. My stomach dropped, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it, until we both recalled that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in to not steal anything, and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of our house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that this house, that appears empty with the rest of the family gone and all the lights off, was not empty, and there was a dog who would bark if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly to when they found the door open once more, much wider than when I found it, though they were only in a hurry on the way out. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins, with nothing missing, vandalized, or just breaking and entering many, many times. So it's not as unlikely as it may be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. I certainly am glad that my searching came up empty that night, and I did not meet this person face to face. Oh, well, OP, I think it's safe to say we'll all be double-checking our doors and windows before we go to bed tonight. The sun is rising, and the only thing longer than our shadows are our yawns. The jamboree is at an end once more. My thanks to everyone who sent in stories or gave me permission to narrate theirs. Remember, I upload new stories on Mondays and Fridays, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss out. If you have any thoughts about the stories I've narrated, why not leave them in the comments below? And don't forget, if you enjoyed your time by the fireside, to pick 3 of your friends and click the like button in a round. If you'd like a story of yours narrated, I have a submission form linked in the description, and I'd love to learn more of your curious experiences and unexplained happenings. I will see you soon, dear ones, and until then, may your nights be dark and your dreams just a little curious.